I always find it fascinating to hear when people talk about Russia being this base, traditional arbiter of European ideology, when in reality, they are the total opposite of any sort of just improvement in European society. In reality, they're the total opposite of everything Europe strive for, and also, the European Americans. Like, Russia is like the abortion capital of Europe. They are the HIV capital of Europe. They're also the single mother capital of Europe. The more dangerous, like people like to talk about how much danger Sweden and like all the other European countries got because of Muslims, but it's nothing compared to Russia. Russia is just that dangerous. Outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russia is basically a third world country. It has no like there's certain areas that only have like mud roads where they don't have like typical asphalt, concrete, or anything like that on the road. They don't have basic infrastructure for a country, and their internet is so censorious that you kind of have to go on like Telegram. That's the reason why Telegram's so popular there, because the person who made it, I forgot his name, he got arrested because he's pretty much his site's the child exploitation website and drug trafficking website of the entire internet. Like everyone who does illegal shit uses Telegram. And also, by the way, if you talk about degeneracy, they have the highest rates of HIV of all Europe, outside like Africa and maybe certain parts of Asia. Um, Closeted homosexuality is very common. A lot of people there tend to be very non-religious because for a while Russia had state-run atheism, and now they have like orthodoxy. But the issue is, it's not really Christianity, but state-run Christianity. Basically, that's what the Orthodox Church was made for. It was made by the Tsar to control the Russian people. And then when communism came, it was outlawed. And then after a while they had orthodoxy again. But outside of that, you know, Russia, it's like I think it's only like 2% of the population goes to church. Most people there are very nihilistic, very degenerate. Let's see here. The men and women there hate each other. Like people talk about the feminism here in the West, but there they have like feminist groups that commit like assassination attempts on like people, car bombings. They're basically terrorist groups, terror cells. Because they are men and women just despise each other. That's the reason why so many women try to get like green cards outside of Russia, because of how bad Russia is. And you can say the Soviet Union because that's what originally started, the Soviet Union. And then when the Soviet Union spread up to where you have Ukraine, Estonia, Belarus. No, not Belarus. I mean, Belarus is basically part of Russia because they control it. Um, Latvia. There's a whole bunch of countries. I should know them, but I'm not too keen in like each country's. I just know about Ukraine and Estonia and stuff like that. But and I'm also bad with names. With Russia, the FSB has made the ultimate like lie to control the right and the tankies, because the only people that supports them in the West are far right neo-Nazi groups and fundamentalist communists, tankies. The far right supports them because they think they're the bastion of European society, even though if you go outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, it's worse than even certain third world countries in Southeast Asia. Like, it's probably more safe to be in like Southeast Asia than it would be like in certain parts of Russia. Um, it's cold, it's frigid. Like, the only thing they have useful there when it comes to their economy is oil and natural gas. Get rid of that, they don't have anything. There's a reason why we call them a gas station. The left likes them because they still see them, because it's technically true, the Soviet Union never went away. It's just they had to get rid of the system of communism and become a mixed model economy where oligarchs control the government. And we see how that's going now. The ruble is, like the US dollar is worth like almost 10 times more than the ruble. Like, once this war's over, if they win or not, their economy is going to be in shambles because Ukraine's going to just throw every single drone they can at all their oil depots until they can't produce oil no more. Or they can't transport oil no more. They're going to keep going. And they don't fucking care. Um, they lost over 1 million Russian lives. That's a fact. Sorry to the Z-tar, the I don't know what we call them, just the Z propagandists of they want to cope, but they don't understand that it's been proven that Russia still does what they call what's come from Joseph Stalin's name, Stalin tactics, where they force so many men to be pushed in to where they use their bodies as basically, it's like, oh, you go forward, you don't go back, and they point a gun at them and say, if you run back, you get shot. And where Ukraine, they're doing it the smart way is by using drone technology. And that's been doing very, very well against Russia. So well, in fact, that there's a reason why it's like, there's a lot of Ukrainians that died, of course. But compared to Russians, it's insane. Like, there's over a million Russians dead. That's a fact. And, they're so desperate to try to get a W. You see all these, like, AI videos of them trying to say that Ukrainians are surrendering. And, it's like, oh, this is real. You just look it up and it's like, oh, this is fake. And it just shows you how much AI is only used for propaganda. That's the only thing you can use it for, is propaganda. I mean, we can make it where we can make a Vladimir Putin, is like an Epstein Island doing like a shish kebab to a 5-year-old. And, you can say that's real, but then the rest say that's fake. Well, look at the AI videos you're doing. You might as well do that. I'm making this video personally to Doveye, the guy that keeps commenting on every single one of my videos. This video is just to make you seethe in fucking anger about how this literally called a special military operation. For quite some time, you couldn't even call it a war. Like in Russia, if you called it a war, you'd be arrested. Like you'd be arrested for like 3 or 4 years. And it's kind of funny because a lot of the Russian prison population got sent to the war. We've seen so many viral videos of of other Russians recording like criminals, like particularly like well-known criminals within Russia and internationally, like cannibals, because they have a lot of cannibals in Russia for some reason. And it's like you see like this one famous cannibal just on the trenches. And they be like catching them just eating people. It's like, oh, the either the Russian soldiers or the Ukrainian soldiers, and you just see them just getting the bodies and just eating them. And there were so many Russian bodies that they were putting them in pallets and wrapping them up. And then that's the reason why you see these memes going around with a meat cube because they still do Stalin tactics. That's the only reason why they're winning. And where Russia is using that tactic, they have a bunch of Russian people from outskirts of Russia, because what Russia does is they have a bunch of small areas in Russia where they basically tell their people to fuck like rabbits, and they have like 5 or 6 kids. It's very poor. If it was for Russian Cyrillic being so phonetic, I guarantee most of them, if not all of them, have some form of literacy, and a lot of them have fetal alcohol syndrome. So that means they're not that bright. You've been seeing like videos, like actual like videos of like Russians recording them, other Russians recording them. Of course, they get arrested if they show it in public, but they don't care because they have nothing to lose because they only do it for money. That's the reason why they're doing it. They're trying to teach them how to put it in a mortar, and they put it in the wrong way because they're not that bright. They're from villages where they don't even have toilets and they use outhouses. That's why you see so many videos of Russians when they do invade a town. They take the washers, the toilets, because of they don't have that stuff in their village. Because outside of Russia and St. Petersburg, it's like shacks. Like you just go in these videos outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, it literally looks like somewhere in like Indonesia or some parts of the Philippines. Except, it's definitely like tropical forests. It's like mud areas because, it's like some areas are swamps, some are forest areas, and it has a bunch of mud. And you hear these people, like the far right say, these people are based Russian traditionalists. It's like these people have fetal alcohol syndrome and they don't know their father. And even if they do know their father beats their moms, and, it's just fucked up. It's like the fucked up situation, the most fucked up situation you could think of. They're extremely poor, and they do it because they're being drafted, but also because they're being paid to, because they turn their economy into a war economy. Because in a weird way, this kind of helps Russia in kind of a way, but at the same time, not really, because that's why, because you can look this up, and it's not fake news, that Vladimir Putin is importing 600,000 Indians, particularly Indian men, into Russia, just to compensate for the low work amount, because they're taking so many Russian men, because they're not doing it smart, they're doing it harder, because, that's how Russian culture is when it comes to their military tactics. They're running out of military supplies that they've been stockpiling for decades. You see videos of them riding go-karts, you see them riding scooters, you see them riding donkeys. There's a reason why, you see these videos, and you also see like videos of them using like World War I tanks, like tanks that are over 100 years old, and they're being destroyed by NATO-style tanks that, Germany, France, and all them, it's given to Ukraine because they know the dangers if Ukraine is taken, because then they'll be trying to take it after Poland. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to reestablish the Soviet Union. And the problem is, Ukraine doesn't want to be back in the Soviet Union. That's why you see, with Ukraine, they don't attack like civilians. But Russia, they send drones to like hospitals, kindergartens, committing war crimes. Because all the gore videos you see comes to, they capture a soldier, always comes from Russians who record, torturing Ukrainians. You can say, well, they should not be marking the Russian soldiers who are, surrendering. It's like, you have these videos like that one famous one of Russians castrating a Ukrainian person. And I'm thinking, I don't give a shit if Ukraine is, mocking the orcs that are coming into the country, and they know better not to do it, but they do it because they are. Because in Russia, it's so fucked up how they believe in their propaganda that their internet is more censored than North Korea now, where it's like there's like 90 days out of the year where they had to shut down the internet just so people who recorded videos of drones hitting their gas oil refineries are being hit by drones. You think that Russia would stop it, but they can't because they don't have enough manpower or resources to stop it. Because Ukraine is doing it smarter. That's the reason why they're losing far, far less compared to the population. If you compare it to the population of what they lost as soldiers compared to Russia's, it's insane. It's like a 10 to 1. To where, that's why you see so many, like there's even one video, it's funny because it's it's more newer, to where, it's like a drone hitting a Russian oil depot, and, the person is saying what's going to, happen, if it comes to people who work there in the oil depot, or the oil refinery, I'm sorry, is a Indian man. Like, you can hear his accent. And it's because in India, they know Punjabi and they also know English. So they're talking to this Indian man who works there in English, the Russian teleprompter saying that, make sure everything's okay and all that. Don't let the drones hit. He's just a worker. He doesn't have a gun or anything. So he tried to make sure to report the damages. He says, "Sir, you need to, we have an issue with our pipelines been blown up by a drone, sir. He's like, yes, Punjabi, we need to stop this. You need to mitigate the damage." And, people like say, "Oh, this is not true." The Indians, like, you hear them talking to them in English. These people don't even know Russian. They're having to learn English to speak to these Indians. To where it's so bad in Russia, it comes to like the massive amounts of Indians are being imported into Russia, that there were conspiracy theories going on within certain far-right groups within Russia, thinking that they're trying to replace them with Indians so they can be more subservient within like the military Russian group. So they're making conspiracy theories. Because, Russia, people like to say Ukraine's far-right. It's like Russia has far-right people too. They're both far-right. Like, I'm still sick, by the way. Russia is, like, they're using they was using North Korean soldiers, but they realized how shit they were, because, they're like 5'2", angry midget bugmen that they only understand, because they've never been outside of North Korea. So they're trying to train North Korean soldiers on the data, and they're capturing North Korea, the Ukrainians are capturing North Korean soldiers, and they don't know anything outside of North Korea, so they see like this new technology, they don't know anything about it. And, they're also getting people from Africa, to try to mitigate as much as possible when it comes to all the Russian soldiers that are dying, because Vladimir Putin knows if there's so many Russian dies, even though how much his propaganda machine tries to keep them being pro-Z, because look what happened with Prigozhin. Yeah, Prigozhin almost tried to do a coup, and many of the Russian people let him pass through into Moscow. And in my opinion, Prigozhin should have just kept going. He should have just kept going and just don't stop. That's a fact. He should have just kept going because he got killed by Vladimir Putin. He should have kept going. And you know what happened? His PMC Wagner, which is partially the reason why they got so far within Ukraine in the first place, and then they lost all that territory yet again, to where all the people who were in the PMC Wagner got separated or got killed because they were considered traitors. Now the PMC Wagner doesn't exist anymore, and like in Africa, they got slaughtered because they have no leader no more. The state of Russia, when you really think about it, it's fucked. It's beyond fucked. I feel kind of bad for these pro-Z fucking Westerners, because they cope and see and say these people are going against Israel. And when you really look into Russia, Russia is the most zogged country on the planet. Like, in Poland, you can't deny the Holocaust. In Germany, you can't deny the Holocaust. In Israel, you can't deny the Holocaust. Those three countries make sense because Poland has extremely high Jewish population. Israel, because it's the home country of well, not really the home country, it's the Palestinian country, but the Eastern European Jews who are not even descended from the Middle East, like those Jewish people are not Middle Eastern. They're white people when you think about it. They're Eastern Europeans who converted to Judaism a long time ago. And in Russia, and it's funny thing, Russia has an you cannot deny the Holocaust in Russia. You can go to jail. And it's because if it was for America, Russia would be Israel's number one ally. Because what people don't understand, a lot of Israelis are pro-Z also. Because if they're not Israeli, they speak Russian there. It's very common because a lot of people within Israel go to Russia for vacation because they have family there. Many of them are pro-Z as well. Like this concept of, Russia being this badass, non-Zog. It's like they're one of the most Zog countries on the planet. No other group is more Zogged than Russia. You have a population that has a fairly decent amount of their population have fetal alcohol syndrome, where so many people there drink, where many generations of Russians are just deformed because of fetal alcohol syndrome. Outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, i.e., the rich people, the IQ is low. The backwards. If they're not like Russian whites, they are Asians. Because what people don't understand with Russia, because even outside like Russia breaking apart, the territories within Russia, like Eastern Russia and Central Russia, they really don't want to be part of Russia. They're just forced to be a part of Russia. They're like there's 30 countries put into one, into what you see in the Russian Federation, and they don't want to be part of it, but they can't do anything about it because they're subservient. Because if they break apart, they'd be genocided. But when like the ones within the Soviet bloc in Western Russia broke apart with the Soviet Union, they fought their way to freedom. And Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons for the Budapest referendum to say, we give up our nukes for the West's security. Now, if you explain this to a Z propagandist, they would say, no, NATO. They would say, like, NATO. And you can't get through their heads. They're Z'd out because they hate America. Back 60 to 70 years ago, they'd be labeled as traitors. And yes, anyone who is like pro-Z Russian, if you was in the 1960s, you would be executed. Like, that's a fact. You'd be tried for treason. Either you'd be put in life in prison or you'd be executed. That's a fact. Like, it's kind of funny because if they're not like traitors, they're like outcasts of society. Like, especially this one named Scott Ritter, who he worked for, the U.S. government, but he got caught, he got busted for being a pedophile. And people think, oh, he's Etzer. It's like, he's a pedophile. You should not trust him. The only reason why he's doing this because he's being paid by Russia. And he knows it's the only group that will accept him for being a pedophile. There was even one soldier who was in the army who deserted and went to Russia. He was in the army, the United States Army, or Marines, I forgot which one he was. And it was because he was being tried for being a pedophile because he had child exploitation videos of kids, pictures and all that. So he fled to Russia. Another person I would make a separate video about because I want to talk about how one YouTuber fucked up so bad if it comes to the data it comes to this guy was named Gonzalo Lira. Was they used him as like a martyr, saying that he was telling the truth about Russia. He was a war journalist. It's like he stayed in his home, his apartment, and was saying Russian talking points. And they told him, you can say what you want, just don't film military targets. But he kept doing it. They warned him. They warned him multiple times. They were being gentle on him. I was kind of shocked that I didn't see a execution style video like of some pissed off Ukrainian who may behead him, use his head as a football, which I would have laughed my ass if I seen that. It was some fat South American pro-Z traitor, in my opinion. And you can say, well, why you should say that? He's been always a part of the Russian government because you see him like, I think it was like in 2008, because he was on like the RT News, pretending that he's a financial expert. He's a known con artist. He's scum. I'll talk about him later, but he's a scumbag. He was a scumbag, and I am shocked that they didn't torture him. There's no proof they tortured him. He died because he was an unhealthy fat fuck who scammed people and was trying to be pro-Z. Another thing when it comes to Russia, comes to like saying they're traditionalist and based. Russia is like the few countries outside, I think, some African countries, which are basically anarchist countries, where they have no laws because, it's a failed country, maybe some parts of South America, where child pornography, there's no laws against it, to where Russia is like the biggest middleman of child exploitation videos on the internet. Like any child abuse videos, it's completely legal there. This one famous video, Daisy's Destruction, there's no laws against in Russia to own and distribute it. It's completely legal there. That's how fucked up Russia is. They have no laws against it because if they made it illegal there, they would lose. I guarantee they have like a market there, like a black market there that's like worth trillions there because that kind of abuse material is a lot of money. It's sick, of course, but Russia doesn't care because Russia it's basically a mafia state run by a dictator, a former KGB person who made the impression thinking that, oh, we're not the Soviet Union no more, we just became into a mafia state. And everything about Russia, it's not some sort of traditionalist country. It's shit. And with my principles, seeing that Ukraine is a white country with white values, trying to have self-determination, we have a reason to help them compared to Israel. With Israel, they caused the wars. With Ukraine, they don't do anything to cause any wars. They got their land stolen with Crimea, their land. And you would think that the white nationalists or the conservatives would say, yes, they have a right to self-determination. But they don't with Ukraine. A white Christian country, when the most amount of white people and Christians in Europe left, with a decent birth rate too, compared to most European countries. They were poor, of course, but that's because of the Soviet Union. They made them poor. Of course, they have corruption issues, but every country has corruption issues. Same thing with Russia. They're more corrupt than Ukraine. And when the war happened, I was thinking, someone who's a principled conservative, I thought, hey, this should not happen to Ukraine. And all the people who were conservative said, no, rah, rah, Russia. I was like, what the fuck is this? And it's like, you realize that these white nationalists have no principles. And it kind of gives me glee knowing that they're losing in America. It comes to the red state, not the red states, but they lost Georgia, they lost New Jersey, they lost New York with that Muslim guy who won. A blue wave is coming. And you know what? I'm glad for it. Fuck it. You don't have any principles, so principal people within the left is going to try to win. And you keep trying to stall because Trump doesn't want to release the Epstein files. He's cutting all benefits of SNAP. He keeps trying to softball Russia and China, of course. And, these conservatives say, we need to join Russia and say, they're our brothers in arms. It's like, they threaten us all the time. They threaten us. They threaten the West in general all the time. They hate us. And yet you want to say they're our friends? They have nothing in common with us. They hate the West. They hate Western values. They hate George Washington. They hate the Magna Carta. They hate the Constitution. They're a dictatorship. They don't understand freedom. They're a country of Europeans who never had the Enlightenment age. If it wasn't for us, they'd be stuck in the 14th century. Same thing with China. They're the only allies they have is China. Russia and China work together. And you think, they'll be friends with us? No, they'll backstab us. We've been always enemies with them because they are fucking scum. Russians are fucking scum. They are the scum of the earth and they hate us. And you think we gotta be friends with them? They legitimately hate us. And and it's called them, they care about whiteness and all that. They're important Indians. They are neo-Bolshevik. That neo-Bolsheviks means of course that means communists, but at the same time they're like neocons. The country of Russia is controlled by their equivalent of neocons. They don't believe in race. That's why they have a bunch of Asians there. You would think they would genocide the East Asians and the Inuits within Russia, but they don't because they need that for population. To where there's racial tensions, they have a bunch of, I think it's 10% of the population is Muslims, to where they have a problem with terrorist attacks all the time there. Of course, they don't report it, of course. Because many of the Russian territories, it's considered Russia, is Middle Eastern countries, but they were forced to be Russian, and they don't want to be part of Russia. And, people there are very Islamophobic there, even though they have a high Russian population. So when you see videos where there's so many Russian people, where they have daily mosque ceremonies within Russia itself, like St. Petersburg, I think it was St. Petersburg or Moscow. It's where you have it, in Middle Eastern countries, like, that music shit with the Muslim shit. I'm sorry, I know somebody swans and probably that's offensive. You know what I'm talking about. And you see that, and you're thinking, this is not a traditionalist white country. This is a country where they want to control people, where they don't give a shit about the natives. They don't give a shit about whites in Russia. They hate them, actually. And I do believe they're trying to replace them with Indians. Like 600,000. I almost said it. I mean, it's true. It's true. They got the poos. They were getting the poos in there. You hear them now even learning Russian, and they have to talk to them in English while they're working down the oil factories where, they're probably paying them like in pennies, literal pennies compared to their wages compared to, USD or euros, like pennies on the dollar or on the ruble. And it's like, the Ukraine used a wooden drone that's worth $50 that hit and caused $5 million worth of damage. Sir. But these Russians can't question it. Now they have these far-right groups that, they're racist and they discriminate against not the Russians, but the Indians, the Muslims, even other white people. And, they don't want to talk about it because, they don't want to admit they have a major neo-Nazi problem. And these people, it's fucked up because you hear all this, Russia's base, trad, and all that. No. They're going to be replaced by Indians. I guarantee they're going to put more and more. India has billions of people, and they were willing to take in probably 10 million Indians. And most of them are men, of course, because they're economic migrants. So I guarantee the Russian population is going to have a problem with the Indians because if they might like Canada, they poop in the street. They're very disgusting. You can say that's offensive, but it's true. It's just they don't want to adapt to Western values. Now, of course, they won't have a problem with Russia because they're disgusted too. But the Russian population is just going to attack them. It may cause a civil war, infighting. So even after Russia wins or Ukraine wins, there's going to be a civil war within Russia. It's going to balkanize eventually. Once Putin dies, they're going to be trying desperately to try to get into power. And there's already been one coup attempt against with Putin. There's going to be another one eventually. And you have Assad in Moscow. He fled like a bitch. He is because all the allies of Russia can't do shit. Even with Venezuela, which we should not invade. Of course, there's no point in invading them. Just let them starve themselves out because they're a failed nation. And it's kind of disgusting when you look at like these past almost 4 years, what you see with Russia and Ukraine. And you're like the far right neo-Nazis say no brother wars, but you're supporting the Russian sides that are clearly killing all the white people. So what is it? Do you believe in white values? Do you have principles? And no, the right doesn't. So you've seen like the moderate left, some mildly okay progressives. Now the tankies would never support like Assad. I think it's funny because people say that Muslim guy's anti-Ukrainian, even though there's like a post where he says no, I'm pro-Ukraine and pro-Palestine, because you start to see a shift within certain progressive groups, and I'll talk about maybe later on, not right now, but you start to see to where progressives are starting to not be communist much anymore when it comes to certain things, and be more moderate to where these needs to get rid of the man-hating and the 41% people out, those weirdos, and they could make both conservatives and liberal disenfranchised non-establishment people vote for them, to where they could have a massive blue wave within 2026, 2028 elections, in Europe as well. And it's just going to be that way. And, it's been almost 4 years of the special military operation. They said it was going to take 3 weeks, and it's cost trillions in dollars, probably hundreds of trillions in rubles for Russia. A large portion of the population is dead. It's getting close to where, it's getting to the Holocaust levels of, deaths within Russia. And they're replacing them with Indians. So, people who are pro-Z, you get what you fucking deserve. Take care. Fuck you.